Just at the airport in Torreon on my way to Ecuador for the Latin America Regional Conference. I'm very happy and glad that you all been here with us today because we have a very, very important issue to talk about it and very important for our organization, present and future. And the experts are Vicky, immediate past president of New Zealand, and Hellen Swales, current president of BPW New Zealand. As you know, New Zealand they are an example how to deal with matters at the Congress, especially in look for our rules and regulations. And I think that this is the most important thing that we have to thinking about. I always, in my conferences, I always put New Zealand as an example of the work they are doing since years ago about resolutions during the Congress. Thank you very much to all of you. I will stay here for a while. And thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Hellen, for accepting be with us today. Bye-bye.
So we're going to turn it over to Hellen and or Vicky, whoever is speaking first, or both together.
Look, welcome everybody, and I just want to say thank you to both Yasmin and you, Anne, for giving BPW New Zealand the opportunity to be a part of what Yasmin has said is quite a special part of our Congress or even our annual conferences in our own country. It's humbling to hear that people elevate BPW New Zealand in such a way that they look to us as having a strength in resolution. So thank you for that. We have a long history in our country of women that have gone before us. So Vicky and I certainly feel the pressure on our shoulders when we go to Congress. So yeah, we do have a long history there. But look, we've put an exciting, what we hope is an exciting agenda for you. We've left enough time for questions and answers afterwards, and we hope that you engage with us on that because we're very open to sharing what it is that we want. So I'm going to kick things off with what does success look like? And when we talk about success, it's looking at what I want to do is give you some examples of policy and how you build resolutions both in your own country and then you take them internationally. So for those of you that might have been with us in Jeju in 2014, I'm actually going to use one of those resolutions that we took. So that year, I believe we took something like 13 resolutions, both internally and externally in New Zealand. And we were wonderfully supported by our BPW New Sisters in Australia. So the particular resolution, and we're very lucky that the powers that be saw the importance of actually keeping this resolution in its uniqueness. So an introduced problem to New Zealand was forced marriages. And it's because we've gone from a mono, bi and multicultural society that it's an introduced problem to us. So one of our clubs, which is just outside of Metro Auckland, saw that there was a forced marriage issue and they discussed it at their club level. And then what they did was, after they had discussed it at their club level, they decided to form a resolution and bring it to the AGM. So they did that, and thankfully they'd done the right research that it was passed at our AGM conference. And then what we did was, it was in time for us to actually take it to Jeju. So we took our resolution to Jeju, and that resolution was looking at forced marriages. But at the same time, Nigeria had taken a resolution around child brides. And there was a thought that maybe those two resolutions should be amalgamated in some way, or one should be a subset of the other. But thankfully, they saw that they were actually two identical or two separate issues that needed to be put on the floor in their own right, and that they stood up. So what we did was we actually did that, and we worked with Nigeria to actually get a good result in that that we had taken something that we had identified in our local community, we'd then taken it to our national conference, and then from there we had taken it to international. But the bonus for us was then, that happened in May of 2014, but the bonus for us was then in November of that year in 2014. It was picked up by BPW International and it was taken to the United Nations, where it was accepted. So that is such a huge win for us as BPW. And it just reinforces how important grassroots issues are and how you can elevate them right through to the international level. So that's just one example, and that I'd like to place with you, that it came all the way through the process. And it was really exciting to come back to New Zealand and give them the feedback that we'd done that. But even a more euphoric feeling was when we knew that it was picked up by the United Nations. So we are indebted to our international sisters who do that. So then once you've got what does success look like, that certainly does feed you from there. And then the next thing is, what do resolutions need to be about? So that was one issue that we saw that was an introduced problem to us. But then you have resolutions that are internal, which is talking about maybe your policies on financial policies, your procedure manual, or your constitution. So those are what we call internal policies, and the same thing happens. So we mirror what happens at international and local level, and that way it actually gives our membership a really good grounding right at the very beginning of how the processes happen locally, and then that's not an unusual system when they get to international or Congress. They're not in awe of the process. And then we have what we call external resolutions. So once again, we took to Jeju a number of internal resolutions that we wanted to table there, as well as external ones. And some of the internal ones could be things like resolutions where you want to maybe have some certain documentation accessible at a certain period of time. And that was one of the resolutions that we took to Jeju. And the wording of it was actually, what would we do? The procedure manual and the voting on the amendments. So that was one of the ones that we took there to international. It referred to one of our procedure manuals, one of our founding documents. And we were successful that we got a country or a federation, as in Australia, who knew enough about our documents that was able to support us when we put it on the table. But then, so those are probably the unsexy resolutions that you do and that you take to international, but they're important. So it's really important that you get it right. So you look at those. So any amendments need to be in sympathy with what's there, and you have to have a really good reason why you want to change things. And those are the hardest ones to get over the line. So you really have to do your homework. It's not a given. Then you've got the external ones, and those are the ones that actually reach or hit the core of people's emotions, I suppose, for want of another word. And what we do with the external ones is locally, there might be some issues there, and one that immediately comes to mind is a resolution that we may bring to Congress, was a local community identified that taking drugs across the counter was something that was too easily done, and that the labelling on those drugs wasn't identified enough, that there was a particular issue with a drug that was easily purchased across the counter, that actually if you had a certain heart condition, you ended up by ending up in hospital, and it had quite a severe impact on your health. So one of the clubs brought that to conference and argued that actually the labelling on across-the-counter drugs needed to be better specified. So it was an issue that was a local issue, but then when they took it and started doing their research and talking to other clubs for support, they found that it actually wasn't just unique to an isolated area in New Zealand. So it was a club in Wellington that brought it, and then we took it to conference and it was passed over. So some of those external resolutions can either stay in your own country because they're your country centric, or they could be external resolutions like the one around forced marriages, or how people are looked after in prison. So when we look at some of the resolutions that we took to Cairo, we actually looked at whether they would be national or globally accepted. So those are some of the things when you're looking at what your resolution needs to be about, whether it's an internal one or an external one. And like I said, the internal ones are the hardest ones to get across the line. You really need to know your homework and you need to actually go out there and support. The external ones will either strike a nerve with somebody or they won't. But I'm going to kind of leave it there, and then I'm going to hand over to Vicky, because we've got 8 points that we want to cover. And so Vicky, over to you.
Okay, so what I'm going to take us through now is actually the process of writing a resolution. And I can't stress enough what Helen said, that in some ways we have that practice going for our own conferences and our own AGMs in New Zealand. So everyone gets into the swing of it, they discuss it at clubs, they write it at club level. So it becomes part of, well, it's just an expectation in many ways if you're part of BPW New Zealand that that's what you do. As far as writing a resolution, if you've got an idea, if you've got an issue, the first thing to do is really to start discussions going with your colleagues, with fellow club members. So if it's an external issue, you can talk about it with anyone. You're just starting to pull all your facts together. Obviously, any issues where you feel that process or the way we do things within BPW and needs to be changed, this is where you're talking with colleagues and you're looking at our current documentation, and then you're really trying to hone in on the idea and get it very clear what in fact you're wanting to change. Because in many ways, that's what a resolution is. It's saying that BPW New Zealand or BPW International wants to do whatever, whether it's calling on their government or to change something ourselves. So it's a statement of what's intended. And to do this, as I said, we have to boil it down because we want the words to be quite clear and to be able to be seen and everyone to understand what it's about. And it's getting rid of examples, it's making it as general as possible without losing what it's about. And I'll talk in a minute about this process of going through and getting the words right. But in some ways, this is where, particularly someone who's never done it before, it's really helpful to ring someone else. And in New Zealand, there's a lot of them. And I know all our past presidents, you give them a ring and you say, I've got this idea, this is my idea for the wording, and they'll come back with, mainly come back with questions. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? How does that fit with that? And then it gets your thinking process going and you're starting to hone down that idea to really be able to put the point across. At the point where you actually know what the resolution's about, you then need to back it up with some rationale about why. And so often our important thing we need to do is to look to documents like CEDAW, look at the articles there. We may want to talk about it in respect of one of the Sustainable Development Goals and how that fits in, or the principles of the Women's Empowerment Principles. So you're sort of putting down all these things, or it may be other UN conventions that your country has signed up for and ratified, and so you can use that as a lever, you know, that our government should do something or other, because if we've signed this, let's get on with it. So you're just trying to put all that together, and it's often very helpful to be able to keep it in a short space, but put URLs into that rationale, so that because they are read beforehand, the process we have is to send resolutions out, so that gives the entree to someone to understand the background. So in New Zealand, we flesh this out, and we also insist that it comes from your club, because we don't want it just to be my own personal harebrained idea. It's got to be something that I have actually discussed with other people, got them on board, and then it goes through to our national conference as something from a club. And the templates that New Zealand used, I've sent to Anne, and if anyone wants them and wants to look at it, you're very welcome to do that. So basically, we have a timeline. I'm sort of moving on now to a little bit about the process of guiding them through a resolution. And my role, it has been for the last couple of years, I'm resolutions chair for New Zealand, and I put a committee together of 6 or 7 people, and all our resolutions have to come in 1st of December, and then we normally don't have our conference till April, May. So there's quite a time gap involved here, but it means that we can then look at those resolutions, say, does it duplicate something? Or if it's something about a constitutional procedural manual, is it in fact correct? Is the clauses there wanting amended? Is it in fact something we can do? All those sort of issues. So we go over them with a fine tooth comb and then go back to the people who've moved it, acknowledging the amount of work that's been put in and trying to help them to get something that is much more concise if possible, and also quite clear in the process. So the whole, we go through that and ask and check with the mover and the seconder if they're happy. Then we send it out to our clubs and ask them. And so there's a whole process of checking. And those guidelines of what we do in New Zealand, again, are something we are very happy to share and can be sent out to you. And also our timeline of how we go through the process. The other part of the process I think is really important is that we have a meeting just before our conference, at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, and work out any issues, because that way we hope to have a much clearer and careful things going through on the conference floor. And as you can hear from the sound of it, we've got so many passionate women who want to do so much that part of our trouble is, how do we get all our resolutions into the timeline? And we want to give people the opportunity to debate them, but we don't, we want to clear up as much as we can beforehand. And in fact, we're now doing email voting of anything to do with our procedure manual in the month before. We've agreed that, and we may even take some other internal ones out. Our constitution and our finance policy always have to go through at conference and need a 66% approval rate to go through. Whether our external ones are the ones we all enjoy about our advocacy, they're at 50%. But we're trying to get some of the others out of the way. We need them to be done, and we want them discussed at clubs, but not necessarily at conference. So how to discuss them is what Helen is going to do now, about as far as presenting a resolution, how to go about it.
Thanks, Vicky. And you can see that there are lots of checks in place, and it's basically to make sure that the action point that we want out of it is actually quite focused. Sometimes you can put resolutions up that are a little bit airy-fairy, and you end up by voting something in and thinking, well, how on earth can I actually apply that when you're doing it? So going through all those checks and balances, it gives those that actually are advocating or when those resolutions are passed, there are actions that are attached to it. And those actions either have a responsibility to the person that puts the resolution on the table, that they've got to do something, whether it's to write letters to ministers or whether it's to do a project, but there are implications to bringing, and it's making people take ownership of not only discussing that resolution, but ownership of what they're going to do with it and how they're going to apply it, particularly around the external ones. So when you're presenting your resolutions, the very first thing you need to know is the rules of engagement. And when I talk about rules of engagement, it's about knowing what your standing orders say, being quite well versed in them, that when you get up to stand and speak to your resolution, you know what's tolerable, what's not, what's acceptable. So knowing the rules of engagement, you need to read those standing orders first. Then what you need to do is you need to sort out who has empathy with what that resolution is and who's going to help you get it across the line. So we were quite strategic with the 6 resolutions that we took to Cairo. So what we did was we looked internationally at who had been working on projects that were similar or fed into the resolutions that we had. So when we looked at our resolution about how our people are looked at in prisons, we immediately went to Bangkok, because we know that that they are working with women in prisons. When we looked at violence, we looked at St. Kitts, because we knew that they had this huge project that they were doing around women and family violence and the death toll and the death rate. And we knew that they would bring the passionate side, that they would bring emotion to getting that resolution across the line. So it's looking at countries that can add value to what it is that you want to achieve, because you've already, when you get up there and stand, you already take it as a given, but you always say, you've read the resolution. So this is where you start the storytelling. This is where you use that emotional ploy on people. You start telling them how it affects women and girls, right? And you pull them in and you draw them in. And if your seconder can actually even build on that, so you work with them when you're with them at conference in New Zealand, which is what we do, or you work with them in Cairo or wherever Congress is, and you make sure that you have a plan and a strategy. Not only by encouraging other countries from outside your region, because normally if it's a regional thing, you would have had a discussion, you would have submitted your resolutions at your regional meetings, so there would have been a consensus that yes, they support you. So then you look outside your region, if you can, to get someone to second your motion, because then what they do is they start that conversation, the circle gets wider, the questions will come back hopefully before you get on the floor. But if not, what you do is, once you've both presented, because you've got your 5 minutes and it's usually a 3-minute, 2-minute split, or you might come up with another variation, is entirely up to the mover and the seconder as to who's going to speak and for how long. But then what you do is you both stay there, because you need to be prepared for the rebuttal. And you need 2 people there, and this is where you work and you make it very clear of what the roles are of the mover and the seconder. But you take notes of what is being said against your argument that you've put. So a second pair of ears is always helpful. Always go up with a pen and a piece of paper. Do not be arrogant that it's going to get across the line. It's identifying the possible things that you need to mitigate. And then what you do is you address those and you rebuttal each of those points that have been put up against you. So then the final thing that you do, and you always do this, is that you ask the General Assembly to support your resolution. You have a call to action. You never walk away and just say that's it. You always have a call to action. We do that whenever we're in front of a select committee and government, and we do it when we're in our own AGM, and we also do it when we're at Congress, because you need to pull people's attention back to what the issue is and what it is that you need to do. It also puts you in good stead when you go to the United Nations and you stand in front and you give the opportunity. But timing is really important. You stick to the limit, which is 3 minutes. Otherwise, you get cut off. And you need to, like I said, you need to know the rules of engagement to make sure you stay within those parameters. So that's presenting a resolution and making sure you get your homework, because I'm sure you all know New Zealand doesn't like to lose. So we like to make sure that we do our homework. Right, so I'm going to hand back to Vicky, and she's going to talk to you about, once you've got it across the line, what are you going to do with it and how are you going to use it?
Right. So what I want to start first of all with is when you do resolutions within your own federation, in your own country. And so for New Zealand, we've got our own policy manual. And so each year we build onto that. And part of that is, it's very similar to if you go on the website, you'll find the international resolutions going back, or they should be there. And they're under particular headings. So we do a very similar thing. Once a resolution has passed at conference, we then build it into our policy so it's ready to use. And in New Zealand's democratic system, we get to use them a lot because our whole governmental process is that whenever any legislation is coming before Parliament, it is discussed or has a first reading, and then it's open to the public, civil society. If you want to make a submission on this, please do. And as BPW women, if we were wanting to put our own individual point of view, we can do that as an individual, but it won't have much strength. If we want to speak as BPW, we can only do that if we've agreed as a resolution at a conference, and that's our policy. So that any legislation in New Zealand that's coming through and that we can see, we have got some policy around it, or it may be that BPW International has some policy around it, or it may be that BPW International is allied like with the International Labour Organisation, and they've got some article we can use, or CEDAW we can use, pull it all together, and we're using that to submit to our select committees, which is a committee of our members of Parliament. And I think BPW New Zealand does them about every 3 or 4 a month. We're speaking to our parliamentarians and being quite definite when we see legislation that is not in the best interests of women and girls. It's not in the best interest of the aims of BPW. So we use that, and we also do a lot of letters to MPs and the CEOs of government departments. It's because if we pass something, then we push that and try and get policy publication and publicity around it. It is, I mean, it's so satisfying. I know when we had a bill about 0 hours, and we were very concerned about employment in New Zealand, and how many people were just, their lives were actually curtailed by the fact they were waiting for the phone to ring to be able to get employment. And that was one of the bills we had a lot of success on and got changed. And you start to see, actually, we can make a difference, but it's using our collective strength, and it's having a structure to go through. And this is what, on an international level, putting together some of these so that our UN representatives can use them is very important. And also that each federation can take back to their own country and work on them there. With internal resolutions, it's then an expectation if something has changed. Like in New Zealand, there's an utter expectation that our New Zealand executive then puts that into place and acts on it. And we know we get called up and yelled at if we don't do what has been agreed at conference. We are held to account, very, very much so. And that process is but it's because it has been documented, because it has been through and it's become new policy or a new part of our procedure manual, then the expectation and the questions can be handled factually, looked at, has this been done? So it makes a huge difference. I'm just going to go back to Helen now about building expertise and how we go about mentoring people to get into this frame.
Helen, if I can just jump in for a moment. You've seen Yasmin's. Yasmin, on to you.
Okay, thank you. Just 3 minutes to take off. But I want to ask you a question. I think that it's important to follow up, because many times we place excellent resolutions, but at the end, it's no follow-up at all. So how do you feel about it? And the second is, I don't know if you talk about it, but make sure before you place a resolution that it was not presented in previous congresses. So we need to read the previous ones to be sure that it was not refused. As happened, for example, 3 years ago, that I hear that the young BPWs were talking about a place of resolution to put the 40 years, the top to the young BPW. And I said, that resolution will not pass because it was already discussed in Canada in 1999. So this is my concern. And the question for you, we usually send the reports, the annual reports, and we place all the resolutions that pass during the Congress, asking if they follow, and if it's yes, in which way. But I don't know actually how this is going. Thank you.
I'll answer this and then I'll go on to the next one. So Yasmin, thank you so much for that question, and it's something that has concerned BPW New Zealand for a wee while. So after Cairo and after we got the resolutions report, we were very proactive, and we may have not followed process, but we haven't been wrapped over the knuckles as yet. But we sent the resolutions to the UN representatives in New York, because a lot of our resolutions that we took to Cairo would actually fall under the auspice of the committees that actually sit in New York. So once again, it's taking it to, or knowing or being aware of where possibly your resolutions can go. So not only do you need to be aware that you need to get them across the line at international, but then you need to, as you said, Yasmin, you need to follow them up to make sure that they're executed through. So we know BPW New Zealand, after Jeju, with our internal resolutions around access to information on the website, we followed that through and chased it up. And it took us a wee while to do it, but we got it there and the information is available. I think it's the responsibility of those of us that are more aware of the process and the system. And I look to possibly international past presidents, or maybe the constitutional chair, or someone, or federations, like I said, that know more. The responsibility probably lies more heavily on them, because they're aware of the system and they need to push, but then they also need to bring those other affiliates and federations along with us so that they understand that there is a process, that we do need to, if we've taken the time to write these things and put them on the table, then we continue that vested interest in them, and we make sure that they're not just left there in the pages of our policy document, that they're actually activated and worked on. I don't know, Vicky, if you've got anything more to add to that. I'll hand over to you and then I'll close off. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a responsibility going with moving, whether that you are actually monitoring and checking that something is going forward. And I mean, if we can't see anything, I think you start with a polite letter and say, I'm wondering about this, that, or the other. But if not, then I know with our resolution, which we took to Jeju and we didn't see very much happening, we then took it to a regional meeting and followed up at the region. So that, again, it's using the structure that's in place to push and just to build awareness. This was passed, what's happening, bringing it up.
Yeah. So I think as Vicky said, you do have to continue that ownership of anything that you do take, and following up is really, really important. So I'm going to kind of now move on to our next one, and it's kind of building expertise in your federations and your clubs. So what we have is to use the language that has been introduced at International. We have named it the Issues Task Force, and we have a chair. So in our structure, very similar to what happens at International, we don't have a VP UN, but we have a VP Issues along with our VP membership. And under our VP Issues, she has a task force and a task force chair. Now, in our policy document, we break it down into education, health, the sustainable development goals, but there are areas, employment, that we have. And what we've done over time is that we've built up experts in those areas and fields. And they all are connected through Zoom. They also have a closed Facebook page. And what we do is we encourage that there is a issues expert in each club. So, and that's how we get the information going from top down to bottom up, and we can actually start that dialogue. So once we've talked and to the clubs and we've got that framework in place, which is something that we have in place at the moment, it's about then getting that information out there and mentoring these people. And when you're mentoring them, you're also doing your succession planning, coming onto your national executive, because you're involving people. They're also becoming aware not only of your own staple documents like your policy, your financial, your constitution, but through their research, they're also getting to know all of our international documents. And that's why we come to International standing quite firmly and quite knowledgeable about those documents, because we're having to research them. Also, as Vicky said, we are also very aware of BPW international partnerships, like with the ILO, part with the UN Global Compact. So we've just finished doing our report, Vicky has, to the UN Global Compact. And that's because we're able to collect all that information. So we hold a repository, and having a structure like a task force, and we mentor them. And because we want to take out the Advocacy Award again in Orlando, just putting you on notice here, Liz, we want to take it out a third time, back to back. But it's having all that documentation and you have that process. So people then get enthused, they get to become an animate of our organisation, because they understand the aims, the objectives of our organisation at grassroots, at national, and then international. So building those expertise, and we also involve the young BPWs in this as well. So our task force chair is a young BPW who disseminates that information. And like I said, it's the mentoring, it's getting the diversity of thought of what's happening out in our community. But it also builds that expertise, and some of the things that we talk about, the expertise that they learn, we've got a thing called the Keys to Achievement, where they're achieving goals, they're preparing them for governance roles, they're preparing them for on boards. So there are so many different benefits of having this task force framework that we have, and this expertise and the mentoring and the way we do things. So what I'm now going to go on is, so we've got the structure, it works really, really well. We've got the checks and balances in place, but then what we do is we then look to Congress. So now that we've got a date for Congress, which is the 22nd, it starts on the 22nd of August, we're all gung-ho in New Zealand at looking at the resolutions that we're going to take to Congress, both internal and external. And it's about knowing that timeline. And because we're so focused on the aims of BPW, empowering women and getting a better deal for them, we're looking at those timelines and we're starting to have those conversations at a national level, as I said. So what are the resolutions that we have passed in the past 3 years that will apply to a global lens? And how do we put those together? We have the ability or the flexibility to slightly change the wording of them, provided we don't lose the essence, so that they meet the template that is sent out from Congress. So it's knowing when that template is going to be sent out by the Executive Secretary. It's making sure that you've already got your list there, because we know that it can take a wee while to do the research. Most of our resolutions have already been researched. We've already gone overseas and we've looked at what articles of international treaties that we've got and conventions, and we've tied that in. But it's making sure that we meet that deadline. So we look at what's happening internationally, whether it's to do with our internal policies that we might want to change or advocate for change. And we also look at any external policies that will be quite global. So we're in a waiting game now, waiting for those documents to be sent out by our Executive Secretary, Bessie, and we will start looking at those resolutions that we want to take to the floor to be discussed and debated at Florida. So I encourage, I see that I've got people there from Japan, I see I've got Canada there, Australia and a few other countries, Nepal. I'm hoping that you're all thinking about taking resolutions to Congress in Orlando. We would be only too happy to second any resolutions that you've got on there, or to work with you to help you write them, or to be your seconder and support whatever it is that you have. We are so open to all of those things. I know that our past President Antoinette has asked BPW New Zealand to assist her with some of the writing of her resolutions that she would like to take to Orlando. So we're very, very open to helping and assisting. And I think that's it. Vicky, did you want to add something more?
Possibly just one thing, and that is just to let you know, like New Zealand, our national conference it will be 1st of May next year, and I'm sure the resolutions will have to probably be in by about February. And we're still designing some that we would like to get to Florida, but we won't get them approved to May. So just to let you know, something we have done before is we have sent in resolutions to the resolution chair for the Congress, and we have said that they are waiting confirmation of getting approved at our own conference, and if they are not, we will withdraw them. And that process has worked, and that so it's a matter of working with the timeline. And if you haven't got your federation or your club's approval yet, as long as you have a process in place and the resolution chair for Congress understands it, then it can be withdrawn, that's fine. I'd also just bring up the other point, that's because we've been talking about successful resolutions.
Yeah.
Not all resolutions are. And sometimes they don't get across the line. We've had some like that, but it's been a huge awareness and a learning process about a topic, often one that's a bit controversial. And it means that people can go away, think about it. And as we've got a rule in our procedure manual in New Zealand that you can't bring the same resolution back. but you could tackle it another way. And it's not, you don't only learn from your successes, you learn a whole lot from ones that you don't do well, or if you've realised that other people held different views and you hadn't really taken into account, you hadn't done that collaboration, you hadn't done the discussion beforehand. And successful resolutions are about pulling different ideas together, making sure that a lot of people are with you to start with. So it's that networking that actually drives success too.
So just to add to what Vicky has said, when you're mentoring someone and you've got a resolution on the floor and you don't think it's going to get across the line, and as Vicky said, we've got a policy that says if it's defeated, you cannot bring it back for 2 years. So if you're smart enough and you read the writing on the wall, you lay it on the table or you withdraw it, because you know you haven't done your homework. And once again, it's knowing your standing orders and the political rules around the engagement of it. So, you know, you just need to be astute, you need to be reading what's happening, and you need to be proactive, particularly if it's something that you're passionate about and you don't want to wait 2 years because you've just got it wrong. So yeah, that's it. That's the politicalness. Yeah. So that's our presentation. Yeah.
Great. So thank you so much, Helen and Vicky, and well, to all of BPW New Zealand, of course, because you bring with you the strength of your federation, and we all know you're experts. Every time I'm at Congress or a conference, one of the first things I end up saying is we always know when New Zealand is in the house, because they're keeping all of us on our toes. So we're going to open up the floor now to anybody with questions. So if you do, just jump right in. You'll have to unmute yourselves again. Actually, I'll just unmute everyone at a clip. There you are. You're all in. So anyone who wants to jump in with a question, please go ahead.
This is that, you know, Helen, we did see the UN reps in New York City did see the resolutions that were passed that you had offered up in Cairo, and I want to thank both of you for this great presentation. But I'm also interested in figuring out the question that Yasmin has, which is these resolutions get passed at every Congress, but what's the accountability of making sure that on the executive level, including the executive board, that something happens with resolutions? That's my first question. And my second question is, I don't want to get into a whole discussion about Congress coming up in Orlando, but the membership on specific date for this Congress. And now, all of a sudden, the Congress is shortened. So I'm not quite sure, how does that work? Do we need to put in a resolution? You know, is the membership vote, or what happens with that? I mean, how does this happen when the membership, the paying membership, has voted on something and there's a change without any notification, input from the paid membership, etc.? So I don't know how that works. Do we get a resolution, or is it covered somewhere else? Maybe Liz knows a technical thing, but I don't want to get into Orlando. I just want to get into the process. You know, how do we hold the executive board accountable to the membership? Is basically what I'm asking once we voted on something. So does anybody have that answer?
We'll turn it first over to Helen and Vicky, but I'm not sure if this is resolution. And then I did want to say before, Francesca, sorry, that when you present your question, just try to keep the questions concise, because we don't have a lot of time and we want to have everybody ask their questions that would like to. Over to you, Vicky and Helen, and anyone else who might want to contribute.
I just want to be really, really concise. And yes, a resolution needs to be done. Yes, as the membership, we need to be accountable. Yes, we need to educate our members what our pillar documents are. And I think that's probably the essence of the issue here, Francesca, is that not enough people are aware of our documentation, and not enough people are strong enough to actually call things out when they see them. And this is where we need to remember that if we do it in the right manner, which is what Vicky has said, provided you do it within the framework that you have and you call on the rules that are there and do it properly, then it's not confrontational. But if that doesn't happen, then you have tools within our constitution and procedure manual to do it. But I don't see, there are very few people who are well versed to do that. And when they are well versed and they do research, then the rest of the people need to show their support. Otherwise, you are just a solo person taking people on. But education is the most important thing, and that's one thing I do not see in this international exec. I see us building our membership hugely, but I do not see the information flow of our constitution, our procedure manual, all of our pillar documents. I do not see that understanding being sent out there. Vicky, do you have anything to add? Or Liz?
I would just support what you've said, Helen, and leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both.
Happy to help you write a resolution, Francesca.
Oh, great, Helen. I would love to do that. Thank
Okay,
you.
and this is Liz. Well, first of all, Helen and Vicky, thank you for a great presentation. Of course, you are all known as the experts down there in the southern part of the world, always have been. And I've been privileged to be in your country quite a few times already, so I really enjoy and respect that very much. Well, let me just say this. This is unprecedented for a Congress to be shortened. I am very, very much against it. I have expressed my opinion. I will continue to express my opinion. As Francesca has iterated, it was done without any consultation. But the focus here is the membership. And we need to provide value to our membership. It's been my mantra forever since I've been a member. We need to provide their value, and the members need to feel and see that value. A Congress is held every 3 years. It is the one time where we bring together affiliates from all over the world to come together, not only to learn, to be mentored, to see the whole process in action of resolutions being debated, of business being done, of bonding going on between affiliates, of exchanges of, expertise between our business and professional women. I mean, we are an international federation of business and professional women. We should be operating at the highest levels. And when you shorten it, you remove that. My very biggest concern, and I'll end with that, is that this is going to hurt financially the Congress, because people maybe are not going to go for a 3-day Congress. We're going to run over time. We always do. We always have. And then my question also is, there's no information on educational programs. How are you going to do business and educational programs to provide value to the members in 3 days? I don't think it's being done. So I'm very much against it. I don't know where it's come from. It just kind of came out of the blue, but we'll see. I'm also going to Ecuador today. I'm doing a leaders summit there. Thank goodness. Our regional coordinator from Latin America has followed the resolutions passed in Cairo, which said we should have a leaders summit at every regional conference to educate and help and mentor our membership. This is only the second one in all of the regions. We had one in North America and now in Latin America. Europe did not have a leaders summit, nor did Asia Pacific have a leaders summit. So unfortunately, it makes me quite sad, because these are our flagship educational programs that our members can kind of, bank on, that is going to be there. They're always going to learn something. Because I go back to Helen's original statement in saying that, our members are not well versed in our organization. They're not versed in our protocols. They're not versed in our governance. And we need to focus on that, because if we don't have rules and regulations, then the thing falls apart. We know that. It has to be the same rules for everybody, fair play for everybody, whether I like you or don't like you. That's it. all the rules apply. And that's how we build a very strong organization. So I will find out more when I'm in Ecuador what's going to happen, but I'm very, very disappointed that this has been done. And we will be putting forward some resolutions, and thank you, Helen and Vicky. The USA will be coming to you to look at some support. We're going to be putting a lot of business stuff in there, so I don't know how we're going to get through this in 3 days, because there's a lot of upset people around the world, so we'll see.
I would suggest that's why it's been shortened to 3 days, but that's another conversation.
Oh, well, I don't know. Yes, you may be right about that.
Joe, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I really appreciated this series of talks because I think it continues the connectivity. I've certainly learned an awful lot, especially today with resolutions. And I think we do need to see this more, not only on an international, but perhaps even on a European level, so that we can build. And I know that I've really tried to push them in the UK, but I can't seem to get the message over. I've never had any resolution training, and I know that Sylvia is someone that I could go to if I needed help, but it's certainly not something a little member like me can do on her own. And that's why these training sessions are really good. So like Liz said, you know, we have to get our ducks in a row, we have to get the training, because we won't keep the people. We won't have the subs on the bench.
Yeah.
We have time for one or possibly two more questions. Who has a burning question or statement?
If nothing,
Sorry, I just wanted to know, does anybody know who the resolutions chair is?
no.
No.
Well, we're getting kind of close to the wire, so you know, I don't know. We don't know who's been appointed. Okay, food for thought.
Yes, we have one person with us who's on that board. Nilima, do you know?
Am I right?
Well, she's Constitution, but is she also governing resolutions for Congress?
Yeah. I can't hear you, Nina.
Sorry?
Oh, that's better. I didn't hear what you said. Sorry. Hi.
Hi. There's one question that I wanted to ask. Last time in Cairo, when there were so many resolutions that were put up, you know, and I was like, okay, from New Zealand especially, and I was like, why is there so many resolutions? And in the last 2 years, what I have learned is there are so many things that we need to, you know, speak up. And it's nice to see that at least some countries taking an initiative to come up with, you know, resolutions, which is very important part of this whole BPW. One thing I wanted to ask is if there is a resolution that I want to make, you know, I want to put up, and if, let's say, my club or my country or my federation doesn't approve of it, how is it possible for me to, you know, put that resolution through another country? Is there a way in which we can do it? Especially to Hellen and Vicky, maybe.
Vicky, do you want to answer this one?
Yes, because I don't know about it.
So, Nalima, if your country isn't supporting it or doesn't want to support it, then what you look at is very much like what we did. Look at other countries that have similar issues and have that conversation with them. So we have individual members that need to get a certain percentage before they can put a resolution on the floor, because our individual members scattered. So if they can't get the number there, then we look at an aligning club, and maybe for you an aligning country that can actually help put that wording through for you, and you can work together there on an issue.
And I would say, is because as resolutions chair for New Zealand, occasionally we have someone who's put the idea up but didn't meet the criteria to be able to move it, and ended up being a seconder. But then I have asked on behalf of them the leave of our assembly whether the seconder could speak in place of the mover. And as long as agreement came through, we've been able to do that. So there is some flexibility if the resolutions chair can pick up and get agreement from the Assembly. So it may be that you've just got to work with it, but you may well end up being able to speak to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to jump in here and be mindful of our time. Thank you again and so much to President Hellen and immediate past President Vicky of BPW New Zealand. We really appreciate not only your time, but especially your expertise. And I imagine at least everyone here, and maybe many more, will be contacting you. I will be sending, including me, I will be sending out to all of you, plus everyone else who signed up but couldn't make it, the templates that Vicky has sent to me to share with you. And I think that will also give you more information to work with. I want to mention that, as always, this will be online. It will take a few days of editing, but soon it will be online and be announced, tonight's recorded session. And that the next session next month is in fact Lisbonum. So this is always on the second Wednesday, same time. So that's a given, but will also be posted. Liz will be speaking to us on another very, very timely topic, which is ethical leadership in organizations. And I'm assuming that will also include what to do when ethical lines are being crossed. So I'm sure it will. Liz, would you like to say anything about that yet? Are you still with us? I see you're muted.
Yes, I'm here. And yeah, thank you very much. No, nothing's on paper yet. I've been dealing with Leaders Summit for Ecuador, but that'll be next.
Okay.
But everything's in my brain.
Yeah,
and
that
in my
I know.
Heart.
That I know. You've got it all inside you right now. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say next month.
Great. May I ask if Helen and Vicky have any notes they can also share with us? I did some notes, but I'm a terrible note taker. I really am. I'm horrible at that job.
I actually did a framework of, so we have an agenda that we stuck to, which Vicky produced, and I do have some notes, speaking notes that I did, and I'm sure Vicky can kind of couch something together, which would be more than happy to share with all of you. Yeah, not a problem. Happy to do that.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Great. So Helen, if you would just send that to me, then I can send that out with the template. And everyone, it will take me a few hours tonight because I've got 2 more meetings after this one. But it's night for me. But I will send those to you within the next few hours. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone for attending tonight. And we want to end more or less on time, so we'll take this as our ending now. But thank you to each and every one of you.
Nice to see you, Nalima.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, Anne.